your first time ever seeing a Pro Tools screen before. And the point of the class is really just to introduce you to the Pro Tools platform. We're not going to really go too deep into any particular techniques. We're going to do some basic editing, but really we just want you to get a feel for navigating and setting up a Pro Tools session. And we're offering additional Pro Tools classes in the future. So this is just sort of to get your foot in the door and just to make the idea of using Pro Tools seem less intimidating. And let's talk specifics. We're going to be talking about why Pro Tools is the industry standard, why it's such a fundamental part of WAM core curriculum and what are the classes we teach. And we're going to go over just creating a new session from scratch, and then importing audio, basic editing, and just generally how to manage a good Pro Tools session. And some of you may already have Pro Tools on your computers. You may have received the link to download Pro Tools first, so you are more than welcome to open up Pro Tools if you haven't, follow along with that throughout the class. And we encourage you to leave your questions in the chat throughout. My colleague Adria is going to be going through your questions, and we're going to have a lot of breaks for Q&A, so feel free to, anytime you have questions, leave them in the chat. We're going to be focusing really on basics today, so if you have a question that is kind of more advanced, we may table it. Adria and I are both going to be hosting office hours this Friday at 11 a.m., so you are also welcome to bring your questions there. And yeah, we hope to get through as many of them as we can today. So yeah, just starting with why Pro Tools. There's a lot of different digital audio workstations out there, but why is Pro Tools the industry standard? And the answer is because the features that are built into Pro Tools really surpass other DAWs, both in their development and their sophistication. And a lot of it is just how versatile Pro Tools is and how many things it does incredibly well. So some of its greatest strengths are working in editing. It has good integration with film. It has a lot of mixing capabilities that other DAWs just don't offer. The thing about Pro Tools, and another reason why we offer so many classes on it, is unlike other DAWs, it's not really designed to be intuitive or user-friendly. There is a bit of a learning curve to just understanding how to navigate it, how the platform works. But so it'll take some time in order to get those nuts and bolts, but once you do, it's an incredibly powerful and versatile tool for you to have at your disposal. You can do a lot of different things with it. Like I saw, we have people interested in like podcasting, production, sound design. Pro Tools is really a great tool for all of those things. And it's definitely a valuable skill for you to have, like, and if you're interested in audio. I've been Pro Tools certified for almost 3 years now, and it comes in handy in so many of the jobs that I do. So for starters, I mentioned this a little bit, but there's 3 versions of Pro Tools. There's Pro Tools First, Pro Tools Standard, and Pro Tools Ultimate. Now, Adria is going to pop a link in the chat about that gives a really great detailed breakdown about how those versions differ. Just in summary, Pro Tools First is their free version. It's really great as an introduction if you're sort of just dipping your toe in the water and you're not sure if Pro Tools is the right DAW for you to work in, and if it really suits your needs. Pro Tools First is great for that. Pro Tools Standard is what I run at my house. It's what I use for all of my personal and collaborative projects, and Pro Tools Ultimate is their full-fledged, like everything you could ask for, and that's what we run at our studios at WAM. So as far as equipment needed, this is a question we get a lot, because you may have Pro Tools, but it's like, okay, what else goes along with that? And before I get too much into that, I will just say that our executive director, Terry Winston, did a really awesome Home Studio 101 class a couple weeks ago, and she went into a lot of detail on all of these different things, on different kinds of computers and how much processing power you need, on different types of audio interfaces, on headphone and monitor recommendations. So we're going to post another link to that as well, and I definitely recommend you check out that entire class because it's super, super helpful. The one thing I'll say that kind of may be unfamiliar to a lot of people on, like, if you're looking over this list, is an iLock. So what an iLock is it's this little thing right here. Hopefully my virtual background isn't masking that too much, but it pretty much what an iLock is, it looks like a flash drive. It looks like a USB drive. The way I've heard it described through another DAW that I think is a perfect analogy was they called it the ignition key. And so really what it is the iLock, you plug it into your computer and it's what allows you to run Pro Tools. It doesn't hold your sessions, it doesn't hold any files for you, but what it does hold is it holds your license to run Pro Tools, whichever version you have, and if you have plugins or other sorts of like additional virtual instruments that you've paid for, it holds the licenses for those as well. So thankful. So if I've like bought some plugins that I want to use and I'm using on a project, I can take my iLock with me and use it on any computer that runs Pro Tools. So you don't need it for Pro Tools first, thankfully, but it's a necessity for standard and ultimate. And I'm showing mine off again because it is rose gold, courtesy of our WhamCon New York this past year. So if you also have a rose gold iLock, feel free to shout them out in the chat because they're cool and they're a basic necessity. But aside from that, everything else is relatively standard to your own home studio setup. And if you don't currently have a home studio setup, hit up the Wham YouTube channel, and Terry's lesson on that is super, super helpful and in-depth. So, okay, Adria, do we have any questions starting off?
Yeah. So there were a couple questions about getting certified, as well as just more specific iLock questions. So one was just how to get certified. I had dropped just the Avid link, education link in there, which has kind of some directions about directing people towards resources, but I don't know if you have anything to add about certification.
Yeah, the only thing about certification is you need to be enrolled in a Pro Tools class because you need a Pro Tools certified instructor to open up those certification exams for you. And yeah, the exams are like really, I mean, there's books for them, which I definitely like recommend. But the number one thing is the more time you spend in Pro Tools prior to certification, the easier the certification exams will be. There's really no substitute for just going in and putting in the time for that. So
Cool.
that's that.
Yeah, and then in terms of we've got some iLock questions. So one is I have an iLock from my course at SAE. Expressions, do these, or I'm not sure actually if the expressions was what was being referenced, but
Sure.
do these ever expire?
Your iLocks don't necessarily expire, but your Pro Tools licenses can. It depends on the type of license you have. Some of them are subscription based, so you pay for a year, either once a year or in monthly installments. There are also perpetual Pro Tools licenses. So your iLock is good forever. It's the licenses on it, and same thing goes for plugins. Some plugins you buy and you'll have them forever and you can get free upgrades on them. Other licenses are like temporary and you'll have to renew them in a year or however long. It really varies based. But for as long as computers have USB drives, your iLock is golden.
Okay, cool. There are some, looks like there's some other questions about iLock, but I think it might be good to keep moving just for time's sake. And then we can, because it looks like some people are also jumping in the chat, and I can also try to jump in for any remaining iLock questions. So let's keep going, I think.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. So first up, let's go in and open up Pro Tools, shall we? So if you have your Pro Tools, you're welcome to just click on the little logo. And when you open up Pro Tools, the first thing you see is this dashboard window. So what this is where you create your new session and you set all of the parameters and preferences for your session. And one thing that's important to know about Pro Tools is that it saves the session right when you create it. So this screen is very important. It's very important how you name your session and where you put it and the settings that you use for it, because that will be used for the entire session. So we can just go down the list. First thing, pretty self-explanatory, but naming your session. And people have different naming conventions. I tend to err on, as you will see in one of the next slides with one of my Pro Tools folder structures, I tend to err on organization and just being as detailed as possible. And one of the great reasons for that is if you're working on a large project that takes months and you have a lot of different versions, or if you're collaborating with someone else, the more detailed your Pro Tools session can be, the better. So every time I'm doing a session at WAM, I'll have the client's name, the project's name. If it's a band and we're doing multiple songs, I'll do the song name, and I'll do the date that I'm working on that project for. So for these next ones, we have file type, sample rate, bit depth, and these are, so file type refers to the type of audio file you're going to be working with. So there's WAV and there's AIFF, and I'm not going to go too much into detail as to what sample rate and bit depth are. What I have listed here, WAV files, 44.1 kilohertz sample rate and 24-bit bit depth. Those are what I recommend for if you're starting out and you don't really know, if you don't have any sort of specifics, I think that's a good place to start. As you grow in your own Pro Tools knowledge, you might have more specific settings, and if you're, depending on the project you're working on, there are sort of specific requirements. But if you're just working on a basic project and no one is giving you any specific requirements, 44.1 and 24-bit is a great one to use. And IO settings, that is your input and output settings. So that is telling Pro Tools where your audio is coming from and where it is sending your audio to. If you're using Pro Tools on your personal computer, you can just have it as last used every single time because no one else is changing those settings. If you're using it on a school computer or a studio computer, you may have to go in and set the IO settings specifically. And probably most important is location. So I think I'm going to stress this in most of the slides, but just being organized in your Pro Tools sessions is crucial, because Pro Tools sessions can get massive, and as you start to work more and more audio, you're going to have more and more Pro Tools sessions. So having organization in both how you run your sessions and where you store them is just going to save you so much time and hardship. So file structure. So another thing about creating a Pro Tools session is when you create a Pro Tools session, Pro Tools doesn't just it doesn't just make a session file, which is what this .ptx is, a Pro Tools file. It creates an entire session folder. So you can see on the bottom here, I have my little folder path. So it starts with my hard drive and then goes into the collaboration and then goes into specific project and then goes into the specific Pro Tools session. And another thing Pro Tools will do is it will automatically create subfolders based on the type of session you're working with. So we can go, so you have audio files, and what audio files is pretty much every piece of audio you import, every piece of audio you record goes into that folder. And then bounced files is all of the audio that you are bouncing or exporting out of your session ends up in this folder. So if you have recorded a podcast for a client and then you want to send them the audio file, once you bounce it, this is the file that you go, or the folder that you go to find it. And then plugin settings, it's not the thing is with these folders that will plugin and rendered files, these aren't folders that appear in every single Pro Tools session folder. Pro Tools will only create the folders if it's necessary for the session you're running. So for me on this collaboration, there were some custom presets in like the instruments and the plugins we were using. So it was necessary for the plugin settings to be sent with the Pro Tools session folder. And session file backups, Pro Tools automatically backs up your sessions at a given interval of time. You can set that interval in your preferences. I will say that this session file backup folder has saved me many a time, but is definitely not an excuse for rapidly and compulsively saving your Pro Tools sessions throughout, because unfortunately Pro Tools does have a tendency to crash and you can't always rely on the session backups to save you. So PSA, save your work often. Okay, any additional questions now?
Yeah, I'm actually just looking in the chat right now. There's, it looks like some people are struggling a little bit with Pro Tools First, that it sounds like they're getting a message, they're opening it for the first time and receiving a message that the maximum number of projects has been reached for their account, even though they've never even created any projects yet. So I unfortunately am not quite sure, but I don't know if you have any ideas, since I'm not sure if you're even a Pro Tools First user per
No,
se.
unfortunately, I've never used Pro Tools First. That is that a common problem that people are having?
It
Or?
looks like, yeah, at least several people have been, a handful of people are receiving the same message. Yeah, actually,
Yeah.
many people,
Oh no.
a resounding yes that this is an issue.
That's annoying.
I'm,
I would assume that, I don't know, maybe there's some sort of extra registration process that, or like activation or something like that. That
one
would be my only
person's,
guess.
okay, and then one person is also saying that they're receiving a message that the hardware isn't connected. So I don't know if you can speak to that.
I feel like for a lot of, a lot of times when I get these sort of, oh, something isn't connected, or oh, some file type isn't compatible, which happens more frequently and more obnoxiously than I would like. A lot of times I just quit Pro Tools, reopen it, and that error message goes away. So especially if it's a session that I'll see an error message and I'll look at it and be like, no, I know that this session is fine. I just had it open. Sometimes you do need to quit out of it, restart, and give Pro Tools a second chance. But unfortunately, I don't have any experience with Pro Tools First, so.
Okay, yeah, and then for those, I'm happy to look into it now and see if I can quickly
Yeah,
find
yeah,
anything. But
absolutely.
just, I think this is a great thing for if people are able to come to the virtual office hours on
Exactly.
at 11 a.m. on Friday.
Mhm.
Both Layla and I will be there, and we can look into it in
Yeah,
the
well, yeah,
meantime.
I'll definitely do some looking into it afterwards. So if you're having Pro Tools First problems, we will definitely make that part of office hours on Friday.
Okay, cool, thanks. And then it looks like Melanie in the chat has um, one solution that worked for her. So
Oh, awesome, awesome.
yes, okay, but
Yeah,
I
I love
think
it. I love it. Everyone's working together in the chat. It's I love it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Sounds like, oh, and someone has also put a link in that very issue. So thank you,
Oh,
everyone.
perfect. Oh my God,
I
I
think
love
we
this.
can keep going for now
Cool.
at this point.
Awesome. Awesome. So I love it. Everyone's helping each other. This is perfect. So we're going to talk about the two main views that you're going to be seeing in Pro Tools. So there's the edit window and the mix window. And so this is what about a third of a typical edit window looks like for me when I'm working in a full band session. Because this is Pro Tools for absolute beginners, I understand this looks very intimidating, so I made a simplified version of it. So the edit window is where you work with your audio clips. It's not just where you edit, it's also where you record and where you play back your audio. So for just starting with absolute basics, each of these horizontal bars here is a track. So that's either an instrument, or sometimes it can be an auxiliary effect of some sort. And this is where you hold, oh, there you go. And then all these waveforms you see here, these are audio clips. So each one, so your tracks just house the audio clips that you have either recorded or you've imported from somewhere else. And the colors here, this is just my personal coloring convention, so I can easily, because again, organization is key. Every engineer has their own different convention of how they like to color code their sessions. I just have mine color coded by instrument so I can easily navigate through. And then up here is a lot of the sort of main navigational and just work tools of the edit window. So we have the transport here, which should look familiar to most people. It's play, record, and just like stop, fast forward, rewind, all that stuff, basic list, like navigating your session. And then here we have the counter, and I have my counter set to both bars and beats and minutes and seconds. And that's because it's a music session. Those are both ways that I need to navigate through. If you're doing a podcast, you're not going to need to see bars and beats. And you can see I have these different rulers here, and you can customize to have 8 rulers or to have 1 depending on what kind of session you're working with. For this one, because I want to keep it simple, I just have my timekeeping rulers, and I have another ruler here for markers, which I use in this case to just mark out parts of the song. So if I'm punching in vocals and we need to go straight to the bridge, I know where that is. It's also great for editing. If you're listening through something and you hear something you need to edit, but you want to keep playing through, you can make a note of a marker there and then come back to it later. And then on this side here, we have the track list. So this lists all of the tracks that I have in my session. As you can see, most of them are not visible right now, just for the purposes of keeping this clean and easy to navigate for you. And then on the other side is your clip list. So this is where all of your audio clips are located. So if you import a clip, sometimes you don't want to directly put it onto a track, and you can just find it in your clip list later. Or every time you record, every time you cut a track, it ends up in this list, and it's really easy for you to find and recall clips there if you need them. And then there's a lot of other things here, but I'm going to slightly put them off because I'm going to get back to them in the next window as well. So up here, these are the different like tools that you will use for editing and for navigating your session. And I'm going to get very detailed in those in a second. And then up here we have 4 different edit modes that 3 of them I will get into significant detail. One of them is very specific and like not very necessary for you to know as a beginner, but we'll be getting to all these. But first, the other window you're looking at is the mix window. And you will see automatically that the mix window really resembles a console or a mixer that you find anywhere. And that's by design. So you'll see it has its volume faders and it has a lot of other stuff. It is designed for the pretty much the same functions that you would use a mixer on a console for live sound at a recording studio. They make the interface to resemble that. And again, I'm going to make this so it is much easier to navigate. So first of all, it may seem self-explanatory, but you will see that every track that you see on the edit window, there's a corresponding column on the mix window. So, and you'll also notice that not only is there, so you'll see that like not only is there of like volume fader here, but if you look and see -5.7, the volume on this track is also listed as -5.7. So a lot of the stuff you see on one window, you can also find on the other. You can also customize the view of your edit window. So if, for example, I have no use to see my inserts on my edit window, I can get rid of them and only access them in my mix window. Pro Tools is really great for, it's great for, not only is it necessary for organization, but they give you a lot of opportunities to organize your sessions. So it's awesome for that. So some of the basics of the mix window are, like I said, volume fader, panning knob, which is just left to right in the stereo field. And there's some crucial buttons here like record enable, which pretty much tells Pro Tools when you hit record, which tracks you're recording to, and then there's also solo and mute. And you will notice that those buttons also exist in the edit window right here. And up here we have inserts, which is where you can put any effects, plugins, virtual instruments you have. And we have sends, which is where you can route and send your audio to another track, whether it's a reverb effect here or for a sort of parallel track. We're not going to get too much into that. And you'll see on the edit window side here, I have these two little boxes that I don't have on the mix window side. And the only reason I took them off is just to shorten the view of it. But this is your input and output. So this tells Pro Tools where the audio for this track is coming from and where to send it to. And at the bottom, you have this little comment section, which I like to use for just taking notes on what microphone I use, what preamp I used. If I was recording with a piece of outboard gear, I'll write out what the gear was and what the parameters I set were, just so I'll know for my own reference. And if I ever send this session to someone else, they will have as much detail on it as possible. So yeah, those are the two basic windows. And now that you know how to navigate those windows, the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make an audio track. So for that, there's keyboard shortcuts for all of these that I use all the time, but I know when you're first starting out, it can be very easy to get bogged down and confused by like letters and commands and all this stuff. So we're going to put a link in the chat for some really great keyboard shortcut references that I do recommend you get familiar with. But right now I'm going to try to sort of bypass those as much and just go through the menu up here. So you go to track, go to new, click on that. And then this window here pops up, and this allows you to say how many tracks you want to create and the type of track you want to create. So I'm going to say create, and then boom, we have an audio track. So now that we have an audio track, you may be recording audio or you may be getting audio from another source, in which case you will need to import your audio. And the way you do that is you go up to the file menu here, go down to import, select audio, and then you click on that. And then this window here pops up. And this looks like a sometimes this window can look like a spaceship, but really it's pretty easy to navigate once you get it. This top part is just your basic file structure on whichever drive you are importing from. And then down here is a list that'll be collected of all the audio you're importing. And there's two options. One of them is add, one of them is copy. I say copy every single time, because what copy does is it'll put audio into your session and it'll also copy it into your audio files folder. And your audio files folder is where your Pro Tools session will look to find all of the audio you're using in your session. So I don't understand why people don't do copy every single time, because it's just a great safety net to have, so you can make sure that you never ever are left in a situation where you move even if you move the entire session folder somewhere else, if your audio files were being referenced outside of your audio files folder, then those won't get carried with you, and then you will be left with something that looks very similar to this. Now, this is true story. This is a Pro Tools session that a dear unnamed friend of mine sent me over the weekend. And I got their permission to use this before including in the slideshow, because I just thought it was hilarious that as we were getting ready for this class, this happened. But yeah, pretty much. And what they did is they sent me their entire Pro Tools session folder. So we thought, okay, great, we're golden. But what they did is they took their audio files and they just dragged them directly into Pro Tools. They didn't go through the import window. And then they sent it to me so I could listen to it. And then I opened it up and this is what I saw. So yeah, so don't be like this well-intentioned individual, and always use the import window, always use copy, just to be extra safe. Okay, any questions now?
Yeah, so in general, I think there's a lot of people are having trouble with just kind of getting up and running with the kind of messages that people were receiving with just getting Pro Tools first opened in the first place. But yeah, I think as Christina just mentioned in the chat, I think a lot of these questions are kind of great for troubleshooting in the office hours. So I'm going to kind of just direct it towards, some people are asking about importing. So one person was saying that their Pro Tools only accepts WAV files and they can't import MP3 files. Do you know why?
Um,
Um,
so they're importing MP3 files into it, and that's not working, or
that's what it sounds like. Can't
okay.
import MP3 files.
It may not have to do with the file type. It may have to do with the bit depth or sample rate, because a lot of times you need to convert those files. And sometimes Pro Tools will do that in the import window. So I would check the settings that they use to set up the session, if they set it up with WAV or AIFF files. And then I would also compare the bit depth and sample rate settings of their session with the audio that they are trying to import. Because usually it's just a compatibility issue that has to do with Pro Tools needing to convert the files that you're importing to fit the parameters of the session that you've created.
Cool. And then someone else was asking, can you import different VST or plugins? How do you do it?
Yeah, for plugins, that's a totally different process. I think for that we'll probably I will if you're available to come to office hours on Friday, we can talk about that a lot in detail, because that is a very different process from that. And yeah, it's requires a lot of stuff actually outside of Pro Tools in order to do. So
Okay,
yeah.
cool. And maybe one more.
Sure.
When you import a file that is not the same quality format, parentheses, bit depth and sample rate, what do you do? And I,
Well, in a way, it depends on what the difference is. It depends on if the quality is higher or lower than what you're importing. The ideal thing is to, as much as possible, either match your session to the audio you're importing, or if that's not possible, I mean, because it really depends on where this audio is coming from. And like I said, Pro Tools will usually, if like for sample rate, if it's like at 96 and your session is 44.1, Pro Tools will usually convert it to do that. Yeah, that's the number one thing I'll say, is usually Pro Tools can convert it. If it can't, then again, you need to go back and look at the settings you have for your session and the metadata about the audio file itself.
cool. I think we can keep moving along.
Awesome, great. So now we're going to get into those tools that I talked about earlier. So the time has come. These are the three, I'm just going to talk about these three main tools here that are the foundation of what you're going to use to work in your Pro Tools session. So first we have here the trim tool, and the trim tool works with the bounds of the session. So like the name indicates, so trim, so you can like cut off the edges of like if you have sort of extra tails and like you were recording for longer than you like had audio like coming through, you can trim off that extra part. Or if you can do the opposite, you can, if you accidentally cut something off, you can use the trim tool to extend back out. You can also adjust the bounds of, if you have fades, you can adjust that with using the Pro Tool or the trim tool as well. Next, we have the selector tool, and the selector tool, you can use it to highlight part of a track or to move across multiple tracks. You pretty much, the selector tool, you'll see it in a second. It kind of resembles what your mouse cursor looks like while you're typing. It's that sort of very narrow, like capital I shape. And you just use that to, yeah, select a portion. And it's great for kind of, if you just want to use a specific part of a clip, or if you want to place your playhead at a specific point, that's what the selector tool is great for. Grabber tool, pretty self-explanatory. It looks like a hand, and you just use it to grab either entire clips, or like you can select multiple clips and just move them around, or just do things to manipulate the entire clip. So how this all comes together and One thing I really recommend for people starting out with Pro Tools is getting to know the Smart tool. Now, the Smart tool can be very daunting and intimidating at first because you have to kind of be very aware of where your mouse cursor is and what you're doing with your clips at all times. But once you get a feel for it, it just makes everything so easy and so efficient. And the way you access the Smart tool is you just click on this little bar surrounding the three tools, and then all of it will turn blue, and that's how you know you have Smart tool activated. So I have this little screen capture video. So if you look in the top half of your clip, when you use it, you have the selector tool. And then when you move to the bottom half, you have the grabber tool. So you can easily just like switch between like either one. And then when you go to the edge of a clip, you have the trim tool. So you can like adjust the bounce of that and you can make something shorter. And one of my favorite things about it is you can also really easily do fades in the Smart tool. So if you go to the top corner of a clip, you can do just a single fade. If you go to the bottom corner, you can do a crossfade. And yeah, otherwise, if you want to do fades, you have to like go into like a separate menu and do it. So I recommend the earlier you can get yourself acclimated to Smart tool, the more efficient you'll be able to work in Pro Tools. And so yeah, next we have the edit modes, which I referred to earlier. So I'll give you a quick little rundown of each of them first. So shuffle is, I recommend it really for editing dialogue. What shuffle does is it pretty much eliminates gaps between audio clips. So in other edit modes, if you're working and you delete a clip, there'll just be this like gap of no audio in between the two clips. What shuffle does is you'll delete a clip and it'll automatically snap the clip to the bound of the clip before it. So yeah, it's really great if you're like editing audio and editing just stuff for continuity. It's also great for if you want to just move around different clips without, and just like I've used it before just as a compositional tool, because I've had an idea of like, oh, I like this groove, but I'm not entirely sure like what order I want these little drum fills to be in. So you can literally just drag them around. Spot is highly specialized. I've never been in a situation where I've had to use Spot. So I'm going to kind of skip over it just for the purposes of if you're doing work that requires you to use the Spot tool, this is not going to be the only Pro Tools class you're going to take. So I'll save the details of that for another time. And again, come to office hours, we can talk about applications of Spot tool all day long from 11 to 12. And I'll talk about grid tool next. So grid tool pretty much locks up. So you see how I have these bars and beats here. Grid tool will lock up to the whatever grid you set for the meter and the subdivision of the session you're working with. So it's really only applicable to music sessions. It doesn't do you much good for a podcast, but it's great for locking in. So you're making edits right on the beat. So if you're like dragging a file around, there's no risk of you dragging it off, like so it's out of time or something like that. And then slip tool is pretty much the opposite of grid. It just allows you to freely navigate within the session without being restricted to the grid or any subdivision. So again, this is a little, right now we're in shuffle mode. So you see that I drag this clip over and it just automatically slides on down. Then I delete it and those clips automatically jump together. And then we go over into grid mode, and you'll see that when I make adjustments and I use the trim tool, it only trims on the grid, but you can also go and adjust what you want the grid to be. So if I want the grid to be smaller, I can do that. So I have not as restricted by it. And then you have slip, which just allows you to do like to navigate without being restricted to a grid. And a lot of the stuff I was doing was editing, but this also applies to like placing the playhead and like selecting and all of that stuff. And the one sort of thing I'm gonna like, the final major point I'm gonna go through that is just very helpful for navigating a Pro Tools session is zooming, because when you're working, if I'm like editing I don't necessarily want to be able to see the entire session, because if I'm doing fine tuning editing, that's not going to do me much good. So there's a lot of different ways to do zooming. And the first one is up here. These are your zoom presets that you can set to any specific preferences you have. And they pretty much go from like different levels of being locked in, and they'll do that surrounding your playhead, wherever that's located. And you can customize those as you'd like. There's the zoom tool up here that you can use. And then down here in this corner, you'll see there's these little plus and minus buttons, and there's one going horizontally and one going vertically. And so this allows you to, like, so if you press the plus button here, that'll just work on zooming in on the timeline, whereas if you go plus minus here, that'll just work on zooming on your different tracks and making those tracks bigger or smaller. And the one that I use the most, and I said I wasn't going to get into keyboard shortcuts, but honestly, every time I want to zoom, Pro Tools has these great features called hotkeys, where I can literally just press R and T on my keyboard, and R is zooming out, T is zooming in. That for me is by far the most efficient way. So I pretty much default to that all the time. The only thing about hotkeys is you need to have this little like AZ square here that needs to be yellow, and that needs to be activated, and that means that you can use hotkeys. Because if you look over in this corner and it's gray, that means you're not going to have access to any of your hotkeys. So that's kind of the one little keyboard shortcut I'm going to give you, is just R and T, because for me that's just, I mean, I use that, I'd say 95% of the time. So I think, yeah, just final questions.
Yeah, so one question about there was a question a little while back about the tools, and a question about is there a way to use two out of the three tools instead of activating the entire smart tool? So maybe just using a different combo of two tools.
Um, no, it's kind of an all or nothing thing. I mean, you can you like the again, not getting too much into shortcuts, but there's like a way on your keyboard to toggle in between different tools. But um, yeah, I mean, like the nice thing about Smart Tool is if you don't want to use a tool, you just don't put your mouse in that region. So you kind of have a lot of control over which tool you want to use, or you can just go back and forth. But there's no sort of subdivision of Smart Tools.
Cool. And then another question about how do you change track clip and color?
Oh, so for that, it's really easy. You just go here and you click on, if you can see this little bar just at the end, kind of like all the way on the end, and it's just on the mix window, it's down at the bottom. And you just click on that, and this beautiful little color palette pops up, and you can select a color. And then there's also a drop-down menu for that you can choose if that color is for the track, the clips in the track, or just like selected clips. And yeah, you can color code it that way. So they give you plenty of gradients to choose from. So it's very nice.
Cool. And another question, what is the best way to adjust the tempo?
For that, you go up into here. So that's this little, so you'll see here, it says like count off meter and tempo. And then you'll see it has this little chord note here. So pretty much you can just go here, and right now it's listed as 71, and you can click that. And there's two ways you can adjust tempo. You can type in the number, or like you can kind of use the arrows to go up and down. Or what I like doing is if you have, if you have this part here selected and you tap T, it acts as a tap tempo function. So if you're not sure what your tempo is, you can just have that area selected and then tap out to what the tempo of whatever you're working with is, and Pro Tools will automatically import that tempo. So that is what I would say is the easiest way to do that.
Cool. And then someone was asking about seeing how to print a mix. So I guess bouncing, I'm assuming, is what they're talking
Mm-hmm.
about. Do you, I know,
Mhm.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh yeah, yeah, bouncing. Yeah, it's also here. I think if I like jump back to one of my slides where I show the file menu, that's the easiest way to do it. So give me a sec to hop back. Yeah, pretty much. So you go to file and then you go to bounce to, and then like it'll one of the options will be bounce to disk, and then that'll open up a window where you can choose like if you're bouncing a wave, an MP3, that sort of thing. So that's the easiest way to do it, is just in the file menu. If you're bouncing your stereo mix, and if you're bouncing a single track, then you just right click on the track and there's an option to bounce from there too.
Awesome. And maybe one last quick question. How do you move your cursor across the timeline if you have a long project, like you can do in Audition, for example? So maybe, I don't know if that is specifically about just jumping to the end of the project, like a shortcut for that.
Um, I don't, there's no shortcuts that I have for jumping to the end. One thing I use is, I use the tab key a lot. And what the tab key does is it'll jump to the end of a clip. So that's what I use kind of, for if I want to, yeah, move my playhead to like a specific point, is I'll just like use like tab and it'll jump to the end of the clip that way.
Oh, sorry. There was actually a clarification about
Oh,
just now maybe moving around the project in a very
oh,
long project.
oh yeah. I mean, for me, yeah, that's kind of, I don't know if there's any like super quick way to do it. I just, again, will just tap R a bunch of times, click on where I want to go, and tap T a bunch of times, and then get there quick.
Okay, cool. Um, and I think, I'm not sure, I just want to make sure of the time.
Mhm.
Just, let's see. How do we connect a blank track to record audio? I'm not
Um,
quite sure if what,
mhm.
yeah, it's a little,
Yeah, if you could,
I'm not sure.
where are you recording the, yeah, if you could, clarify that, like, where are you recording the audio from, I guess is the,
Just how to set up a track to record.
oh, pretty much, yeah. So you'll just create your track and then you'll go into these I/O settings here. And so this will tell Pro Tools like if you're working off a patch bay or if you're working off an interface, where like wherever you are, you click on this one and this says it's coming in from this input. And then this will tell it where you want the audio to go out to. And then you hit record enable and then press space to record, and then yeah, you just record whatever you want from there.
Uh,
Awesome. I'm going to jump in just for a minute. I want to thank everybody for being here. We'll stay on a couple more minutes to answer some of these last questions. And I'm going to pop into the chat the link for our office hours event this Friday that Layla was talking about. We do these every Friday, and they're really a great informal session to come in with all of your questions. But before you leave, I have a quick favor to ask. If you could go to this first link, wham.rocks/feedback, and give us your feedback, what you liked about the session, what you want to see next. This is really, really important for us so we get to build out these programs. We're doing these all for free during shelter in place. We're doing these all for you, but we need your help because we need to raise money to keep these going. So if you could take 2 minutes to fill out that feedback, that helps us out so much. I'll pop that link into the chat as well. You can see our upcoming classes at wham.rocks/everywhere. We have lots of stuff in May, including the office hours, but next week and the following week, we have some really exciting sessions. We have career panels with representatives from Dolby, from Shure, from Isotope, and from Sweetwater. So if you're looking about getting a career in audio or you want to know what kind of jobs are out there, these are going to be really excellent opportunities to hear right from the company reps. So I really highly recommend those. And finally, if you're able to, or if you like what we're doing, there's always a donate link. We really appreciate those of you who have done pay what you wish to help us keep these classes going. And most of all, we just really appreciate you being here and helping us to change the face of sound. Layla posted something really amazing on her Instagram about Pro Tools classes and representation. And I'm wondering if you'll share that with us real quick, Layla.
Yeah, I just was kind of thinking about it last night and prepping for this, that the first time I saw any Pro Tools video that was being like run by a female or a non-cisgendered male was well after I'd gotten my Pro Tools certification. Like I went through my entire Pro Tools learning process with just hundreds of YouTube videos of men talking about Pro Tools, men talking about plugins, men talking about mixing. And then it was finally like, I don't know, I think just last year, someone sent me a link to talking about us using a sampler in Pro Tools, and there was a woman navigating it. And I never realized like how powerful that was until I saw it for myself. So I think, I mean, yeah, I just want to thank everyone so much for joining this class. And I think it's really exciting that for some people here, your first ever Pro Tools experience is from a like non-cisgendered man. So I think that's really excited. And so I'm really, really glad I got to teach this class. I'm really glad everyone was able to join us, and I hope you got something out of it. And I hope this is just the beginning of your Pro Tools journey.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Layla. Again, if anyone has any outstanding questions, we'll stay on for a couple more minutes, but if you're good to go, feel free to sign off at this point. We will post the recording of this session sometime within the next week to our YouTube. I see so much love coming into the chat, so big ups to both Layla and to Adria for moderating. These are fantastic, fantastic starter sessions for these Pro Tools journeys that everyone's on. And let's see, survey after each session. That's okay, Sylvie, if you just want to give us your feedback, you can DM us on Instagram or just send us an email. And I'll leave it to Layla and Adria to take any last questions. Otherwise, have a wonderful, wonderful Wednesday or whatever day it is in your time zone.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. So, yeah, Adria, do we have any other questions coming through?
I think I'm trying to scroll through all of the thank yous that have flooded in. Let's see. I think,
Yeah.
like a lot of the bulk of a lot of questions were about kind of the initial hurdle with Pro Tools first.
Sure.
For
That's a bummer. I'm gonna download Pro Tools first today and see if I can.
Yeah, and for anyone else who's still on the call, if you had a really specific question, and forgive me if I missed it in the slew of chat messages that were flying by, but feel free to drop it again if you have a burning question that I missed. Oh, there actually was one question, and I'm unfortunately not sure if this person was still here, but someone was commenting about having version 12 of Pro Tools and was asking if those change as frequently as iPhones. Just in terms of how often Pro Tools, like the software, gets updated and upgraded.
It gets I think it's not as bad as iPhones, and thankfully compatibility stays even if you don't have the most recent version. So like if you have like, I mean, I'd say like, I think we're at what, like 12.9 now, and I have like 12.8. I think if like you have 12.7 or 12.6, you'll be fine. It's like the upgrades tend to be regular, but they tend to not be massive. Like I like remember the most like recent update. One of the big things was you could name your tracks in the create a track window. So yeah, they do come up with upgrades semi-regularly, but they're not like, they're usually not that significant. Like if there's people who want to stay on top of it, that's great, and you have the access to that through your Avid account. But aside from that, it's really just like pretty small things.
Cool. And one other question, is there a good source to learn/relearn IO, all the ins and outputs in Pro Tools?
Is that specifically referring to like signal path, or what's
Maybe just, yeah, I'm not sure if Jess, who asked that question, wants to clarify, but I was assuming maybe just in IO connections.
Yeah, Jess, if you could clarify that. And I see I have the chat open now. I see Catherine's question as well. So other shortcuts, Copying and pasting tracks, I find dragging tracks around to be finicky as opposed to just, are you talking about tracks or are you talking about like audio clips? Yeah, Catherine, if you're audio clips. Okay. Easy thing to do is holding down option, click, and then drag. That automatically copies the clip that you're working with. So that's my recommendation. Yeah, that's the easiest thing to do is just like if that's helpful. Okay, so Jess says okay, Catherine, what if you're doing? Okay, here, Jess, here, I'll get to Jess first and then I'll get to Catherine. So all the things I struggle to get, sorry, Adria, did you want to jump in?
Oh, no, I was going to say, I think we also might have to end the meeting relatively. So why don't you go ahead and get it, answer those questions, and then we might have to end. And for any additional questions, please do, take advantage of office hours on Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific time.
Yeah. Okay, so Jess, so all the things, I struggle to get audio to work on my laptop, and I've messed with I/O so many times, I may have completely messed it up. Jess, I think I kind of understand the problem you're dealing with. If you can make it to office hours, or you can also just email me personally, Moheimani at womensaudiomission.org. It's probably has to do with your playback engine, but I would need to know more about what your specific setup is and what interface you're using. Because yeah, I know the problem you're talking about, but I would need more information about your specific setup in order to properly troubleshoot. So hopefully you can make it to office hours. If not, you can get in touch with me and I can work with you more directly on that. So Catherine, so what if you're dealing with multiple clips from different tracks? Awesome, Jess, I hope to see you there Friday. That'll be great. So Catherine, if you're dealing with multiple ones, you can do either like you can do like shift or command, depending on how you want to select multiple clips, and then you do an option drag, and then that'll apply it to all of them. So shift is for like selecting a range of different things, whereas command is for selecting specific thing. I think if you're working with multiple clips from different tracks, you're probably going to do like hold down shift, click, select all the ones you want, and then hold down option and then drag them to where you want them to go.